I'm going to be extremely blunt. Persona 3 Reload is my favorite Persona game, and I think as of right now, it's the best Persona game across the board. Now, I know that might be a hot take, but allow me to explain and blab about why I, as someone who never experienced the original releases of Persona 3, and worked my way backwards from P5 to the rest, have so much praise for Persona 3 Reload. Don't worry, this video won't have any heavy spoilers for the most part, as I'm sure there are others just like me who never had the opportunity to experience the original releases, and I'd never want to take that away from anyone by spoiling the story. But I did want to share some of my thoughts on the game and speak on what I think it does right, as well as what I maybe prefer it and think it's the standard future Persona titles should strive for. I said this before in my initial impressions of the game from just playing the opening hours, but Persona 3R wastes absolutely no time. From the jump, it's engaging you in the bigger picture of the game, throwing the mystery of its world right at you, and showing how potentially dark this journey will be. The themes in the game and the sheer amount of character growth from the entire cast are extremely intriguing, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of this as a returning Persona player. See, my first Persona was Persona 5, and although I love that game to death, I recognize a lot of flaws in its story, and how it portrays its characters even. It also just takes much longer to get the ball rolling and let go of tutorial mom's hand. It's more or less the same with Persona 4 in terms of pacing at least. It takes a minute for that game to really get going as well, but fortunately that game's story carries it heavy and the characters are super likable for the most part. I say all that to say, I just didn't feel the same playing Persona Reload. It might not have all the bells and whistles a game such as Persona 5 has, but it gives off the impression to me, at least, that the people who made this Persona, whether we are talking about the original or Reload, were much more focused on quality over quantity. And man, is this game's story, its gameplay, and characters absolutely top tier quality. I won't get too into the story because I think it's one people should go into as blind as possible for the best experience, but I love the darker themes of this game and how complex the characters can be at times. For me personally, it's a lot more appealing than the more anime-like depictions of people in the later games such as Persona 5, and from talking to friends, I get the impression that this installment of Persona is actually a lot closer to its Megami Tensei roots. The themes of this game are very thought-provoking. There's actually a lot of moments I had where a character said something to me or something major happened that shifted my initial perspective, and I just had to sit back in my chair and ponder on it because it was so meaningful. And not just within context of the game. I'm talking about it was meaningful to things that pertain to my own life and my own personal experiences growing up, especially for the things like character introspection and the overall message of the game. It definitely shows in how this game carries itself too, I feel. This entry in the Persona series just feels a lot more mature in its own right. Don't get me wrong, all the Persona games are extremely mature, but there's something about how real moments with the characters in this game feel, or even within the events. The way they handle characters' growth over time, but also how they depict people, period, is some of the best in the series as well, and because of it, I think this cast is probably one of my favorites ever in all the Persona games I've played. And just to clarify, I'm not just talking about the members of CEASE. I'm talking about your teachers, all the social links, and even all of the antagonists you encounter throughout the game. Akin to the day-to-day moments in game, there's just something about these individuals and their journeys that feels so real and often hit home when they're going on their long spills. What helped me get into this Persona so fast too is, unlike my first foray into Persona with Persona 5, Persona 3 Reload doesn't constantly feel the need to spoon feed you and hold your hand. Right out the gate, this game is speeding along and keeping a steady pace. In fact, from the very start of the game, it feels like you have more control over how you spend your time. If you want to focus on the social links right away, that's an option. If you want to spend hours in Tartarus, go right ahead. No one's stopping you. There are deadlines, but those deadlines are really just for the main bosses actually appearing. So it's more like best make your preparations for the upcoming event rather than you have X amount of time, or it's game over. From my understanding, you could theoretically tackle all the dungeon blocks in one go if you're really about it. Me being me, I took advantage of this freedom and maxed out all of my social stats a third of the way through the game, so that I could spend as much time as possible doing the social links and min-maxing Tartarus as soon as possible, especially when it came to grinding out the dungeon blocks in one go, which honestly was so fun to me. I love the challenge it brings. This level of freedom is really refreshing coming off of playing the Persona series backwards because it feels like I'm in control of my playthrough all the way until the end. Speaking of those dungeons though, Tartarus and the mystery that comes with it, that you slowly discover more as time passes and you clear more floors in the months in the game go on, is absolutely immaculate. Usually I don't care too much for these long grindy dungeons in any type of game, but something about conquering Tartarus is so satisfying. I also just like how it retroactively prepares you for main bosses by giving you a means to test your mettle up until your last drop of SP against the bosses in each block and eventually Monad doors. It even gives you the means to restore your SP to spend even more time there, which in my run allowed me to gather an abundance of materials to sell often and regurgitate money and XP I earned and diffusing new personas very often. Essentially every couple of floors or boss encounters, I was running a new team if I managed my resources right. It also put me in a position where if I know I can't handle the floor bosses, I can maybe backtrack a little bit and spend some time grinding to fuse better personas quicker and come up with better plans of attack. The amount of time I needed to personally spend on these kind of activities was a bit harder to gauge in Persona 4, and especially in some parts of Persona 5 on Merciless. The latter being especially difficult to gauge because the dungeon crawl was far too easy, and it really showed off how unbalanced that game was. That's thankfully not the case here though. I'm a masochist when I play my JRPGs, and I'm not gonna lie, I love cranking up the difficulty as far as it possibly can go. And might I say, the difficulty in Reload is perfect. The game really stimulates your brain and makes you really play into being a part of the full arcana. I can't tell you how many times, especially on my first climbs of Tartarus blocks, that I had to rethink my whole approach to fights, mid-fight even, especially with how I managed my resources and what abilities I gave my strongest personas. It was absolutely necessary to be a jack of all trades at all times, or I could get caught lacking and it's an instant game over. Especially with the main bosses and the immense amount of pressure they could apply, with their many specific gimmicks or entire resistances to all means of normal attack, essentially forcing me to stop spamming for hitting weaknesses specifically, and maybe taking an approach that involved me debuffing the opposition more, and buffing myself as much as possible so I can give myself a higher chance of hitting criticals. The addition of the Theurgy gauge mechanic makes this even more satisfying to pull off. It's essentially your free nuke skill depending on how you utilize it. If you take time to max your damage output and maybe even get status elements up, it can be the difference between a win and a game over. What I love too is that every aspect of combat is actually enhanced by spending more time with your party members and getting their passive abilities. So for me at least, it feels like nothing you do in this game is a complete waste of time, as it actively aids your climb of Tartarus. Inevitably, the full moon boss encounters. If you couldn't tell, the gameplay is definitely there. By endgame, I felt like I was an absolute god with the amount of abilities I had and how capable each persona I had obtained was. Well, until I attempted to fight Elizabeth. Elizabeth made me go back to the basics. She's kinda scary, I'm not gonna lie. The last bit of combat I like is pretty much standard, by the way, so I'm not going to touch on it too much, but the critical hit cut-ins into your team all-out attack is just so damn satisfying. I don't know, there's just something so metal about your characters pulling out the evokers, shooting themselves in the head, and summoning their personas, and I absolutely love it. It was extremely satisfying too when Junpei specifically out of nowhere decided to start hitting critical hit after critical hit after critical hit. Bro was actually carrying me through the game. Now, this last one is obvious because I feel like even if you haven't played Persona, it's very well known how fire the OSTs are. Persona 3 Reloads, hands down, might be one of the best JRPG OSTs I've ever heard, especially with the amount of tracks that are actually vocal tracks. Now, I want to preface this with the fact that Persona 3's music is actually what got my eyes on Persona in the first place, and it did this without me ever touching the original game, or really any of the games in the series until Persona 5's initial release, mind you, so I might be a tad bit biased. I was a bit skeptical when I initially heard the tracks and trailers, not properly mixed, but having played now, I adore every single track in this game, from the front of the track list to the back. I personally align with the opinion that music can really make or break a game, and it's super crucial to get it right to set the atmosphere, as if you're just roaming around with mostly just stock ambience, it's just not the same, especially in RPGs and all of its subgenres. I'm looking at you, Lords of the Fallen. Reload, and honestly the entire Persona series, cause let's be honest, they be absolutely cooking the Atlas music department, doesn't waste a single beat. Any moment the time of day or even the location changes, you can expect the music to properly accompany the vibe, especially in important cutscenes where otherwise you might not know the vibe the game's going for. And don't even get me started on the boss battle music. The final boss tracks especially are some of my favorites of all time. The amount of weight they add to the fights is incredible, and the last boss track specifically had me feeling like a total badass. The more emotional moments in the game hit as well, and are probably the hardest tracks too. Hearing the emotional tracks from the OST in context of events for the first time actually had me bawling tears at some points. I also constantly found myself humming the tracks, not even while playing the game, just as I'm doing other things in day-to-day life. There's a lot of earworm type tracks here. My only real complaint with the music is the exclusion of the FemC's tracks. I know next to nothing about FemC's route in Persona Portable, but I'm extremely familiar with her versions of the OST. Although the game is filled with plenty of other tracks that make up for it, I would have loved to hear the remakes of her themes. Maybe in a DLC pack or something someday. All in all, the entire package of Persona 3 Reload was honestly a wonder to behold. After years of holding off on diving into this game, I'm so glad to have gotten the chance to explore it and get to know these characters. I wasn't sure if, even after rolling credits, I would be able to say that I understand the hype, but honestly, I see why this game is regarded as one of the best in the series. Genuinely, the journey had me feeling all sorts of emotions by the end of the game, and I was shedding happy tears because of how delighted I was with how things turned out in the end. After experiencing this for the first time, I think I can proudly say Persona 3 Reload is absolutely one of my favorite JRPGs of all time, and I can't wait to see what the DLC episode, The Answer, has in store for me. Those are just my thoughts on Persona 3 though, and I would absolutely love to hear what people who have played the original game in Portable and the FES version of the game think of Persona 3 Reload. Does it stack up to the original game, or do you have a preference over a specific version? Also, most importantly, to stir a little bit of controversy, how does Persona 3 Reload stack up to the other Persona games to you? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed hearing my thoughts about Persona 3 Reload, and would like to hear my thoughts on other games in the future, or even more anime, please let me know by leaving a like and subscribing for more content in the future. Until next time, y'all.
What was that?
So, I bet some of you thought the video was ending. Mirai Red Sage here, roughly 7 months into the future from my initial recording of the first half of this video. And man, has it been a really long time. See, what happened was I actually made this video, but never finished it. Why, you might ask? Well, the DLC for Reload, episode Aigis Aka The Answer, was announced, and this left me with a bit of a conundrum. Do I finish the video and just make another for when the DLC drops? Or do I wait and bundle it all together in one package? I think you know what I chose at this point. Anyways though, Persona 3 Reload episode Aigis is here now, and I'm fresh off the heels of completing it. So, how do I feel about episode Aigis? Well, the answer might be more complicated than you think. See, coming back to Persona 3 after such a long time removed from the base game has given me probably one of the most interesting yet conflicting experiences I've ever had with a JRPG in my life, outside of my run-in with Kingdom Hearts 3, and it's left me possibly somewhat questioning the package as a whole. I think it's important to make clear that going into the answer, I had no preconceived notions about this episode I was about to play, so unlike others who have experienced the original version of the game, I have nothing to compare this chapter to from both a gameplay and a story perspective. On top of that, 7 months removed from a game is a really long time. Not only have my experiences in that time frame changed my perspectives, but also at this point in the year, there's a lot of other games coming out that I wish to spend time on. And not just that, I've been going through my backlog lately. So how my time spent and whether I felt like it wasn't being spent well sort of influenced my experience playing this game, unfortunately really. That being said, let me start to delve into my experience playing this, starting with the bad. Light spoilers ahead, of course. Coming in particularly hot here, the actual gameplay loop of the answer for me was hands down the worst part. Now, I know what you're thinking, wait, Red Sage, you said you loved Tartarus. This is just that over again, so what exactly changed? Well, that's the issue, actually. Nothing really changed. Remember how I said being so far removed from the base game put me in a weird position? This is kinda what I was hinting at. Despite liking how Tartarus was structured in the base game, coming back to this expecting something just a little brand new, when in reality it was going to be more of the same, hit me with the craziest whiplash. Similar to Tartarus, the exploration for this has you exploring the dungeon blocks and fighting bosses at the apex of each, topped by an event. Inherently, this isn't bad at all. In fact, at first, it wasn't really too big of a deal for me, but very early on, I started to notice a certain thing that for some reason bugged me in a way that never really bugged me before in any JRPG I played. And this is super nitpicky, but every couple of floors, the layouts and the scenery just repeated. Now, on the surface, this isn't a big deal. I mean, a lot of dungeon crawlers do this, but after a while, this started to eat away at my brain like a motherfucker. It's really weird too, cause at first I want to say I was enjoying being back, you know. The actual combat is what you expect. I still enjoy that aspect of the game so much. The boss fights at the end of the blocks are just as challenging as ever, and I find joy in fighting them. But oh man, the repeating dungeon segments this go made it feel like I was going through literal hell personally. It's such a weird thing too, because the longer my play sessions went, I could feel it eating away at my mental health. Like, it was actually making the grind itself unbearable for me, and this was really weird because in the base game, I loved the grind. About halfway through, I was legitimately dreading turning the game on because I knew for hours I'd just be mindlessly running through these floors, and genuinely this became a stain on my playthrough, I think. For about 4 days straight, I was fully unable to play the game because of how it made me feel. I will say though, this is a gripe that is very unique to me maybe, and I recognize for some this sort of thing is literally whatever. From talking to friends though, who were also playing the game at the same time as me, I don't think I'm too crazy when I say this. The dungeon crawling this go is tiring and it can really make the experience drag, but I digress. Now that that's out of the way though, we can finally talk about the good stuff. The real meat and potatoes of this experience. Starting with the combat. Despite my comments before, for the most part, I still really enjoy the actual combat this go. It's still your run-of-the-mill Persona gameplay. Episode Aigis actually throws you back into the fray, essentially starting from a 0 point with a base level of stats and everyone's personas reset. So you get to rediscover that juicy power creep that the games are known for. This time around, the enemies are significantly tougher if you choose to tackle the Abyss of Time on hard mode, or the new difficulty, Heartless mode. I did not play Heartless mode though because my friends told me about it and it sounds miserable. So we just went with hard mode. If you pick anything below Heartless mode, your Persona Compendium from the base game actually gets to carry over, so you can summon from it all you want, as long as you meet their level requirements and you aren't a broke boy. This time around though, things were a little bit different for me at least. My usual go-to heavy hitters being the MC and Junpei were no longer really options. The MC because, well, you know, and Junpei, after that nerfing, just was not the beefy boy critical hitter he once was. So with Aigis now fulfilling the MC role, I had to find a new lineup to cover her. It kind of felt like the early stages of the Abyss gave me time to do this too, which I really liked. Plus, it gave me time to test out the new best girl, Metis, aka my little bomber. Between her, Sonata, and Yukari, combat really became a comfortable breeze. The enemies here are the same for the most part, but with some new variants and palette swaps, and even some beefy boys with heaps of HP. So fights actually can last a little bit longer sometimes, which I surprisingly didn't mind. The Manon doors make a return this time too, but with a twist. This time there are 3 doors of varying different difficulties to choose from, with different levels of rewards depending on how high you bat. The inclusions of these new mana doors actually retroactively streamline the tediousness of running into shadow after shadow, or in my case this run, trying to speed past the shadow and getting hit by them instead. I swear, they made them really fast this go. Not only did it solve the economy issue in the game for me, but going ahead and taking the time to tackle these mana doors at their highest level allowed me to gain experience and money extremely fast. Plus, the rewarded armors and other equipment were actually a lot better than the ones that I can buy in the shop for the most part, so it saved me money there as well. Hands down, my favorite part about the combat though is still that power creep and the reward you get for buffing the party like crazy. There was nothing more satisfying than buffing Metis and throwing her Theurgy out to literally melt these new mana door bosses. Like I mentioned before too, you actually get access to the compendium from the base game, and this honestly kind of streamlined the summoning process. A lot of the times I found myself really not wanting to go through the effort of fusing personas over and over to get exactly what I wanted, so literally what I would do is go to the original compendium, summon what I need to do the special summons, and just go from there. It honestly made things go a lot smoother. Plus, on top of that, I found myself really not even having to do that sometimes because the game actually gives you all the personas you need through the shuffle. There were so many long stretches of floors where I found myself going like, hey, I think it might be time to fuse some new personas maybe. These guys aren't hitting as strong. And then out of nowhere, during the shuffle time, they would give me a new one for free with honestly all the stuff that I needed anyways. So I really wasn't going to visit Igor as much as I thought. Just like the base game too, there are also optional social events with the members of Cease. The buffs you actually get from them were really important later on too, as the grind kinda got a bit too grindy. Especially once Metis got her buffs, it felt like combat got a little easier for the most part, except for those times where I would instantly get KO'd, of course. Overall, when the actual dungeon crawl wasn't getting in the way and making every other aspect of the game feel like a drag, I really enjoyed the actual combat loop of the game still. What I was really looking forward to with The Answer was the story, of course, though. And I will say, despite how long it takes to get to it at times, I really enjoyed what it had to offer. Major spoilers ahead, of course, for a really old game at this point. To give a summary of things, the story of The Answer sees the Cease team reuniting to say one final goodbye post the events of the main game. While having one last celebration, the team actually gets this really weird feeling at midnight as the night passes into the next day. Not too unfamiliar from the transition into the dark hour, it seems. Noticing this, they make note that the date seems to not have changed at all, but kind of brush it off for the time being. Late in the night, we are awoken to the team calling for help as a mysterious intruder who will come to know as Aigis' sister, Metis, is attacking everyone, leading into a fight where Aigis actually awakens to a new power, with Makoto's persona Orpheus appearing from her original persona, incapacitating Metis for the time being. Upon awakening from the night's events, we come to know for sure from Metis that the day is in fact stuck on March 31st, and on top of that, the team has become indefinitely trapped in the dorm, unable to leave at all. From Metis, we learn that both space and time are being distorted, and thus we begin a new journey to discover the secrets of the Abyss, as well as figure out why Aigis suddenly has Makoto's powers. To do this, the DLC has you exploring the Desert of Doors, which is actually what leads to the dungeons this go round. At the pinnacle of each block, we are met with memories of each of the members of Cease relating to before they joined the team. This gives the group a lot of unpacking to do to try and figure out how each of their individual memory showcases relates to the bigger picture of this story. This aspect of the story was genuinely fascinating to get through, but for me at least, it was a tad bit bogged down by how long it actually takes to get to these moments. Like I mentioned before, in order to actually get here, there's a long dungeon grind to get through in between each, and it's paced out really weirdly. I think if it was up to me, there would have been more moments leading up to this with the team actually unpacking the hangups and whatnot that the initial ending of the game left them with even more, but it is what it is, I guess. I'll leave the actual answer to what all is going on and the finer details of each event, as well as the story's resolutions for those who haven't played to discover though. Overall, I think the story allows for some really interesting introspection for each of the Cease members and really handles giving them a proper closure with the base game's events. As a first time player, is this closure good enough for me though? I'd say it's half and half. On one hand, it was really cool to see the Cease team again and see how the ending of the base game actually affected each individual member, especially at the beginning with everyone seeming so depressed after the events. On the other hand though, I can't help but feel like I really wanted more. Although the ending itself is pretty satisfying for the most part, I was still left wanting more out of what we got. But really, I think I'm just being greedy. Although I did want more here still, the story is still really enjoyable and the presentation here, of course, is immaculate. At the end of the day, I play these games for the story and Atlas delivered on the story front at least. And again, of course, I really enjoyed seeing these characters again dealing with this kind of problem. Anime-like moments aside, these are really real things these characters are going through, and seeing them develop and learn how to deal with this trauma and whatnot is really satisfying. And again, it was just really nice to get to spend even a little bit of time with these characters again. The answer to how I feel about this DLC though? Well, I think that's clear as day. Persona 3 Reload episode Aigis is a mixed bag. I found the story itself really intriguing, and for me personally, I think it was worth the wait, but I wish we got it sooner, and I wish we got a little bit more maybe. My personal gripes with it aside though, I think it's a satisfying conclusion to the overall story of Persona 3 Reload. I do think personally though, going forward, if anyone asks me how I feel about this game, there will be an important distinction between the base game and the actual Answer DLC. Because even though I think the Answer is an actual satisfying conclusion to Persona 3 as a whole, I think the DLC on its own is a kind of meh experience. To be fair though, I'm kind of stacking that up against other DLCs I've played in the past. Maybe someday though, I'll actually go back to Persona 3 FES and see how the experience fares there. I think being able to play it all in one go without such a long break in between might actually change my opinion just a tad, but I doubt it'll be really that much. For real this time though, what did you guys think of Persona 3 Reload? Both the base game and episode Aigis. For those who have played the original games, how does this stack up to the original experience in your opinion? Did they manage to do a lot of things better and actually improve on the gameplay? Or is it still more the same to you? And most importantly, how do you feel about the story? I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, good or bad, in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts about Persona 3 Reload in episode Aigis, please let me know by leaving a like and subscribing for more content in the future. Until next time, you guys.